Let me go to another story over here. Oh, this is disturbing. I'm going to show you this picture here for a second. Um, Here we go. This is Miracle Meadows School. This is a Christian Seventh day Adventist boarding school. It was open, as you can see, from 1987 to 2014. And the reason this is in the news this week, it requires me going back a little bit here. So I'm going to tell you a story about Miracle Meadows School. Very disturbing stuff. Um, Years ago, in 2014, it appeared that a student deliberately poisoned themselves with like a cleanser or something in order to get to a hospital so they could see reasonable adults and then say, "Help, we're all being tormented at this place." And the doctors are like, "Oh no." And so local authorities got involved and they investigated this school and they found out, oh, it's not just one kid who's going to extremes to like send out an SOS signal. A lot of kids at the school are in trouble. And it got so bad that the school's leader, her name is Susan Gale Clark, she soon surrendered on charges of child neglect resulting in injury. There were also a few other misdemeanors. Another teacher there, Timothy Arrington, he was charged with choking a student who later became unconscious and was handcuffed in the kid's room when he awoke. Like handcuffs on these kids, what the heck? By the way, another child by that same dude, Arrington, a kid, 14-year-old student was handcuffed over suspicions of sexual misconduct, whatever that's supposed to mean. The kid was kept overnight in a quarantine room, and the kid's wrists were bloody the next day because of how tight the handcuffs were. Clark, the lady running this place, knew about all this, never put a stop to it. She actually handed out handcuffs to her staff to take care of kids as young as 6. So here's what happened. In 2020, 29 former students, all of whom said they had very similar stories to this, they filed a lawsuit against the school and the lady running the school. And they argued that they were physically abused, that they were sexually abused. And the thing is, I don't think these documents were necessarily made public. I'm relying on reporting about it, but I haven't seen the actual lawsuits. But ultimately, this lady in charge, she pleaded guilty to child neglect, failure to report, obstruction of justice, all that stuff. She received a 6-month jail sentence. That's it. 6 months, nothing. And 5 years of probation. But the interesting thing about that is those 29 students in 2020, they got a settlement from the school worth $52 million. This is in West Virginia, by the way. They reached a settlement for $52 million. Largest settlement, I believe, of that kind in the state. But here's where it gets really interesting. After that lawsuit, after that settlement, in the you know how there were all those cases of like the Catholic Church sexual abuse scandals, and there was an open question of like, well, a lot of the victims, it happened so long ago and they didn't realize until they were much older that they were victims of abuse. And there was a move for a lot of states to open the window for statute of limitation laws. Like the laws might have said you can only file these abuse lawsuits if you are a victim of child abuse. You can only file lawsuits like 5 years after the fact. And now it's been like 50 years. You can't do it. Well, in West Virginia, they actually changed the law to get this done. In West Virginia, the Republican lawmakers changed the law to the previous law said you can only file those lawsuits until the age of 22. The new law said you could be 36, or it has to be 4 years after the abuse was discovered, whatever's later. So it didn't just open the window. I mean, it cracked open an entire door there for more lawsuits. And guess what happened after that? Another 31 lawsuits were filed against Miracle Meadows School. 31 more victims who said, I could not file the lawsuit in the past because the statute of limitations had expired. But now that the law has changed, I want to go after these people too for what they did to me. And this time the allegations are even more severe. Check this out. The allegations now range from education malpractice because they weren't getting a real education to malnutrition because they weren't being fed, even though this was a boarding school, and sexual abuse. The lawsuit said the school destroyed documents. They put windows in the quarantine rooms only after they knew they were being investigated, like trying to change history there. Here's a disturbing one. Uh, the children were if they were naughty, they were placed in quarantine rooms, like isolation chambers, alone in the dark. They were cold, they were hungry, they were thirsty. At that time, those kids were given a bucket to use as a toilet. They were not given toilet paper. Their meals, they said, were bread and fruit or rice and beans. That's it. And by the way, they would have to stay in there for weeks or months at a time. That's what those kids went through who were there, according to the lawsuit. It's torture in the name of Jesus. That's what that is. Like, can you imagine what those kids have been through emotionally, mentally in the years after they got, I don't say graduated, they got out, they escaped, they aged out of it, whatever it was. What must they have gone through after that? Like, how much therapy and psychiatric help do you need at that point? It's awful. And I should say there was another complaint also against the dude. Why? Because there was, I want to make sure I'm reading this correctly. Here we go. According to the lawyer for this second batch of plaintiffs, we actually had two clients who got pregnant by a staff member and were forced to have abortions. We thought it couldn't get any worse for these children. For some of them, it was. Just horrific stuff. But here's why I bring all of this up. Their lawsuits, the 31 additional people, recently, their lawsuits were also settled. And they were settled for what I assume is about $48 million. And if you saw the headlines about this, you may have seen headlines that said the total amount now for all the lawsuits against Miracle Meadows School is over $100 million, which is a lot. I don't know if there's any monetary amount you could put on what those kids went through, even though it's a record amount. And also, I don't know that they're going to get it because where's all that money coming from? Miracle Meadows doesn't have that kind of money. So I don't know how much of this actually ends up getting to the victims themselves. Uh, oh, by the way, I mentioned about the kids who were impregnated by a staff member, which is the polite way of putting it or something. There were allegations that some kids ages 7 to 12 contracted sexually transmitted diseases from staff members. That's how bad this place was. Um, One interesting side note to all this. So you might ask, well, where's the school going to get the money for all this? They don't have that kind of money. Well, they were insured. And guess who they were insured by? West Virginia taxpayers. Turns out West Virginia has a Board of Risk and Insurance Management, that's BRIM, that kind of provides insurance. I don't know why a religious school was allowed to use that insurance, but they were. And earlier this year, the head of that division told the Republican legislature, hey, you guys, we don't have this kind of money, not just for Miracle Meadows and the settlement there. That was before the recent settlement. Basically, there's too much abuse and they don't have the money to pay this sort of thing out and they can't go back and collect money. But what's going to happen is they're going to have to increase the premiums for everyone who has that insurance. That means taxpayers are going to be on the hook for it in the long run here. And I don't think the legislature knows what to do about this because they don't have that kind of money in West Virginia to fund something like this for this cause. Um, I don't want the legislature to like undo that window for the statute of limitations because they did the right thing by opening it up. But at this point, it seems like they may seriously consider closing it back because they can't pay out these sorts of amounts. I don't know what they're going to do about that, but I think it's a reminder that listen, if someone tells you there's a Christian boarding school, first run the hell away from it. Nothing good happens there. But also the fact that it was Christian, that is not synonymous with virtue. Like anyone who pretends otherwise may be ignoring some very real problems. And in this case, this boarding school was nothing but a cover for abuse, for allowing adults to get away with abusing children. And the list of victims grew longer because parents trusted this school and the woman in charge who assured them she was acting in good faith. And clearly she was not. And remember, of the 60 victims who were part of these lawsuits and everything, those are just the ones who were willing to go through with the lawsuit. Not everyone wants to do that. So who knows how many other victims there are at this point. So how's that for a messed up story?